The morning after the shooting, 3 things were found in the snow: a Pinkerton badge, face down in the mud, a child's iron poker dropped at the foot of the porch steps, and 1 set of boot prints walking away, not running, not stumbling, just walking. Calm and steady, like someone done second-guessing themselves, 4 men had ridden up Deadman's Pass that morning. They were looking for a fugitive and a fortune. Only one rode back down. This story starts 3 weeks before that morning. It starts on a stagecoach, carrying the last bride Tobias Montgomery would ever need. It was the winter of 1883. Orofino, Idaho Territory, had one reliable source of entertainment. It wasn't the saloon, though the saloon did good business. It wasn't the card games that turned into knife fights. No, the finest entertainment arrived on the afternoon stagecoach from Missoula. Twice a month, regular as the changing of the moon. It arrived in the form of a new mail-order bride. She was always headed up Deadman's Pass, and the finest seat in the house belonged to Jebediah Cole. Jebediah was 62 years old. He was built like a fence post, left out in too many winters. Lean, weathered, slightly crooked. He had driven the Missoula to Orofino route for 11 years. He knew every rut in the road. He knew every low branch that scraped the roof of the coach. He knew the exact spot on Deadman's Pass where the women started to cry. He kept a wager book on the buckboard. 2 columns. Names on the left. Days lasted on the right. Clary. Clara Higgins, 3 days. Beatrice Morrow, 1 day. Harriet Fenn never even made it to the cabin. She took one look at the ridge from the valley floor. She offered Jebediah double the fare to turn around on the spot. He had driven the route 43 times that year, carrying women up, 43 times carrying them back down, most before the week was out. By February, he had stopped feeling sorry for them. By June, he had stopped feeling much of anything. He just opened the door, helped them down, and waited. The thing about Tobias Montgomery was simple. Nobody in Orofino had actually spoken to the man, not in any meaningful way. He came down from his claim exactly twice a year, spring thaw. First frost, he loaded his wagon, paid in raw silver nuggets, and left. No ceremony, no conversation, no wasted time. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall. His shoulders were wide as a door frame. His face was angular, dark-tanned, permanently set against the weather. 3 long, pale scars ran across the entire left side of his face, from cheekbone to jaw, the permanent signature of a silver-tipped grizzly, summer of 73. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in flat light. His hands were large enough to palm a splitting maul one-handed. People stepped out of his way when he walked down the main street, not because he threatened them. He never threatened anyone. They stepped aside the way you step aside for a force of nature. Not out of fear, exactly. Out of the deep instinctive understanding that some things are not meant to be argued with. The rumors about what went on at his cabin were spectacular. Some said he kept enemies' bodies in the mine shaft. Some said he was a shapeshifter, human coming down, something else going back up. Percy Dobbs maintained that Tobias had made a deal with the devil, paid for the silver vein in human company, which was why no woman could survive a week in his presence. Jebediah had heard every version of these stories. He'd heard them so many times. They had worn smooth, like river stones. He didn't believe any of them. But nobody ever asked what he actually believed. So the stories kept circulating. The brides kept arriving. The wager book kept filling up with names and small numbers. By November of 1883, the count had reached 24. 24 women in a single year. From Philadelphia, from Boston, from the careful streets of New York. They came through Mrs. Rutledge's nuptial services, a high-end matrimonial agency out of Chicago. It promised desperate women a wealthy frontier husband and rustic elegance. The agency took a handsome fee from Tobias. It painted a picture of a grand mountain estate. Then it shipped these women westward into something they were entirely unprepared for. That's the last one. Jebediah remembered clearly was Clara Higgins, a banker's daughter from Ohio. She arrived in October wearing a silk dress and carrying a hat box. 3 days later she came back down at 2 in the morning. No lantern, no coat, just running, stumbling along the trail in the pitch dark. Jebediah found her sitting in the middle of the main road. She couldn't explain what had happened. She never tried. She boarded the next eastbound coach and never turned around. After Clara, Jebediah stopped learning their names. Not before they'd lasted at least a week. It seemed more merciful that way. Now, before I tell you about the woman with the Winchester, I need to tell you something first. I need to tell you why Tobias Montgomery had spent 3 years paying women to leave. Because it wasn't what the town thought. It was never what the town thought. Tobias Montgomery wasn't looking for a wife. He wasn't looking for a companion. He was looking for a mother. Deep in the heavy timbered cabin at the edge of his claim lived a boy named Leo. Leo was 7 years old, thin as a winter branch, dark matted hair, eyes the color of pine needles, bright, restless, always moving. He never wore shoes. He slept in the rafters, wrapped in a horse blanket he'd dragged up himself. He ate what was left on plates. Tobias sat at the base of the ladder. He communicated primarily in silence, occasionally in hisses, in moments of genuine alarm, a high, sharp shriek that had sent more than one bride running. He had not spoken a single word in 3 years. Leo was the orphaned son of Tobias's younger sister, Eliza. Eliza had been 26 years old when she joined a westbound wagon train. Her husband died of fever in eastern Wyoming. Eliza made it 200 more miles before the typhus took her on a gray September morning. On the open plain, Leo was found sitting beside his mother, perfectly silent. He had been silent for 3 days by then. A decent scout took him to a Denver orphanage and did what he could. Tobias got word 6 months later. He sold 2 months' worth of silver. He rode 4 days to Denver. He walked into that orphanage with one intention: bring his nephew home. What he found there was not what he had prepared for. The orphanage smelled of carbolic acid and old wood, and something underneath both. In a small bare room at the end of a hallway was a 4-year-old boy. He was pressed into a corner, knees to his chest, eyes on the door, not curious, calculating. The eyes of something that had learned attention arrives with consequences. The man who ran the place spoke plainly. He doesn't speak. He bites the staff. If no family claims him by spring, him. He paused. The county home is not a gentle place. Tobias stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked into the room and sat down on the floor, not in a chair, not beside the boy, on the floor. In the center of the room, the boy flinched, drew his knees tighter. Tobias did not move toward him. He sat with his wrists on his knees and let the room be what it was. He sat for 2 hours. The boy did not come to him, did not speak, but he did not shriek, and he did not press harder into the corner. When Tobias finally stood to go, he held the boy's gaze. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, plain and certain. He came back the next day. And the day after, on the 4th day, Leo crawled out of the corner and sat 6 feet away. On the 7th day, Tobias brought him home. That was 3 years ago. And every woman who arrived at that cabin since, everyone, had run. Not because Tobias was a monster, but because no one was prepared for what they found inside that door. So when the afternoon coach rattled into Orofino on that gray November day, Jebediah climbed down from the buckboard with the exhaustion of a familiar and pointless ritual. He walked to the coach door. He opened it, and then he stopped. The woman inside was not what he expected. No silk, no corset, no hat box. She wore a heavy wool riding habit the color of charcoal, scuffed leather boots that had seen real miles, a man's felt hat pulled low over black hair. And resting across her lap, casual as a walking stick, a Winchester 1873 repeating rifle. Jebediah's jaw stopped working. "End of the line," he said. He always said that. The woman's dark eyes moved to him without urgency. "I can see that," she said. She stepped down from the coach. Her boots hit the frozen mud with a decisive sound. She pulled her heavy trunk from the luggage rack. Herself. No request for help. She turned her face up toward the pass, toward the black cut of the timberline, the flat assessment of someone who has already made her calculations. "I'll need a horse." "I'll need a horse," she said. "Not a mule." Jebediah pulled out his wager book. He opened it to the last entry. Cora Dempsey. He left the right column blank. For the first time in 11 months, he wasn't sure what number to put there. Cora bought the black draft horse at the livery on the south end of town. She paid without haggling. She strapped her trunk to the animal's flank with practiced knotwork. The Winchester went into the saddle scabbard. She checked the cinch twice, not from nerves, from habit. Then she swung up and turned the horse toward the pass. Jebediah watched from the livery post. He wasn't sure why he stayed. Old habit, he supposed. "You know what happened to the last 24, he said. Cora gathered her reins without hurry. "How many of them came back after a week?" she asked. "None," Jebediah said. "Then you don't know what happens after a week," she said. She turned the horse toward the mountain and rode. Jebediah stood at the post and watched her go. The temperature had dropped another degree in the past hour. He felt it in his knuckles before he felt it anywhere else. Above the town, the pines shifted in gusts off the high passes. He pulled out his wager book, Cora Dempsey. Right column, blank. He held the pencil over the page. Then he put the book back in his pocket without writing anything. He watched until the black horse and the woman in the felt hat disappeared. The first bend in the trail swallowed them whole. Down at the saloon, Percy Dobbs was already calling odds on 48 hours. Jebediah didn't take him up on it. He went home, made coffee, sat by his window. He watched the ridge the way a man watches weather. He doesn't yet understand with attention and no conclusions. The trail up Deadman's Pass was not a road. It had started as a game trail sometime in the previous century. Worn into the mountainside by elk and mule deer, someone had widened it once with a pickaxe and a great deal of optimism. That someone had not finished the job. The result was a path wide enough for a horse in most places, not quite wide enough in others. It ran along the edge of a canyon drop on the left. A wall of granite pressed close on the right. It switchbacked up through 3,000 feet of elevation before leveling into the timber plateau. Cora rode it without hesitation. The wind had found its teeth by the time she cleared the lower meadow. It came through the canyon in long, searching gusts. It smelled of pine resin and the cold that precedes serious snow, a clean, warning smell like the mountain, clearing its throat. The black horse was steady. She had chosen well at the livery. The animal picked its way up the switchbacks with the calm attention of something bred for difficult ground. Cora let it work. She kept her weight balanced. Her eyes moved ahead, not down. She had heard the rumors. She had heard them at the train depot in Cheyenne. A woman waiting for the westbound connection had recognized the agency letterhead on Cora's ticket. She had leaned close and spoken in the hushed voice of someone delivering delicious bad news. "Monster of the mountain," she'd said, "breaks women. Nobody lasts a week." Cora had listened politely. She had thanked the woman for her concern. Then she had boarded the train and turned it over for exactly as long as it took to reach the next station, which was long enough to conclude one thing. A man with a terrible reputation in the most remote location in Idaho Territory was, for her specific purposes, ideal. She was not going to Misery Peak to find a husband. She was going to Misery Peak to disappear. The tree line closed over the trail as she climbed higher. Orofino vanished behind and below her, swallowed by the canopy of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. The sound of the wind changed in the trees, less a howl, more a long, low conversation among the branches. The light went gray-green and close. She rode for 2 hours before she saw the clearing. She smelled the wood smoke first. Then she came around the last switchback, and the cabin was there. It sat at the edge of a broad, flat plateau, like something that had grown out of the mountain rather than been built on it. Massive far unpeeled logs, dark with age and weather, 2 stone chimneys, an iron-reinforced front door, windows cut narrow as gun ports. It looked less like a home than like an argument made in timber and iron, an argument that intended to win. The man in the yard was chopping wood. He was exactly as described. Every word of the description had been accurate, and every word had still failed to prepare her. He stood at a splitting stump in the center of the yard, a steel axe in his hands, working with the unhurried rhythm of someone who could do this in their sleep. Each stroke split the oak round cleanly. The sound cracked across the plateau like a rifle shot. His breath broke white in the freezing air. His beard was thick and frost-dusted. The 3 pale scars on the left side of his face caught the flat winter light and held it. He did not stop when he heard the horse. He made 3 more cuts, clean, precise, not rushed. Then he buried the axe in the stump and turned. His eyes moved across her, not the way men's eyes usually moved across women. This was inventory, methodical, taking stock, filing information without visible reaction. He noted her face, her hat, her hands, the rifle in the scabbard, the trunk. Then he said nothing. Cora had prepared for many opening moves. Anger. Dismissal. The immediate offer of a return fare she'd been warned about. She had not prepared for silence used as a weapon, but she recognized it the moment it landed. She had lived with a man who used silence that way, who let it fill a room until the pressure made the other person say something foolish. She did not say anything foolish. She swung down from the saddle, untied her trunk, and let it drop. The sound was heavy and final, like a door closing. "I'll need the room on the east side," she said. Her voice carried across the yard without effort. "The one with the window facing the tree line." Tobias blinked. A single, barely perceptible shift. A man who has stepped onto ground he expected to be solid and found it different underfoot. "Why?" he said. Not quite a question. "Better sight lines," Cora replied. She picked up one end of the trunk and held his gaze. Tobias held it a moment longer. Then he crossed to the other end and lifted it. They carried it inside without another word. The cabin was dark and cold. It carried the particular smell of a place lived in by one person for a long time. Wood smoke. Old leather. The faint, pervasive scent of iron from the mine on his clothes. Cora stood in the center of the main room and took stock. Stone fireplace. Cold, cast iron stove, also coldled. Heavy plank table with 2 mismatched chairs. Gun cabinet on the north wall, padlock. Animal hides on the west wall. Tools on the east. The floor was swept, but not scrubbed. The windows were clean. He could see out clearly from almost any point in the room. She noted that. There was a door on the north wall, heavy oak, locked from the outside with an iron hasp and a padlock. Tobias set the trunk down on the floorboards. He crossed to the north door and pointed at it. Then he walked back outside. Cora held her coat half off and studied the door. The lock was on the outside. Not to keep people out, to keep something in. She was pulling her coat the rest of the way off when she heard it. A low sound from above, not quite a hiss, not quite a growl. The sound a small animal makes when it is frightened and trying not to show it. She went still. She tipped her chin up slowly. In the rafters above the cold fireplace, balanced on a thick pine beam, with the casual ease of something born to high places, was a child, 7 years old, perhaps 8, painfully thin, hair matted, clothing not much better than rags, bare feet on the beam despite the cold. His eyes were extraordinary, bright green, pine needle green, fixed on her with an intensity that was equal parts terror and calculation. He bared his teeth. Cora had been threatened by men considerably larger and better armed than this child. She held her ground. She took in the room again, the cold stove, the empty plates near the base of the ladder, the horse blanket draped over the beam where the boy crouched. The height he'd chosen, not the highest beam, the one with the best angle on the front door. He had picked his position with care. She understood. Not everything, but enough. Her hand did not go to the knife at her belt. She did not back toward the door. She turned slowly and scanned the floor near the base of the ladder. There a small button, bone white, worn smooth by long handling, too carefully made for a child's plaything, too small for any coat in this cabin. The kind of button that comes from a woman's dress, from a specific woman's dress. She picked it up, held it in her palm for a moment. Then she climbed 2 rungs of the ladder, not far, just high enough to be visible at eye level from the beam. She set the button on the 3rd rung, not on the table, where it would belong to the room, on the ladder, where it would belong to him. She climbed back down, turned her back to the ceiling, faced the cold stove, and began to build a fire. She did not look up again. She worked the kindling, the tinder, the careful stacking of the first pieces. The stove began to tick with heat. Behind her, the cabin was absolutely quiet. When Tobias came back, and 20 minutes later with kindling, the button was gone from the rung. He stopped just inside the doorway. His eyes went to the stove. Fire going now, the iron warming. Then up to the beam above the fireplace. The boy sat with his knees drawn up and his chin resting on them, watching the room with a different quality of attention than before. Not threat assessment, just watching. Tobias set the kindling down without comment. He did not go back outside. The first 3 days had a particular texture to them, not warmth. Warmth was still somewhere down the road, more like 2 people learning to move around each other without collision, the way you learn the geography of a dark room. A negotiation conducted entirely without language. Tobias's first tactic had been silence, when that produced no result, when Cora simply absorbed it and kept building the fire. He tried logistics. Second morning, he informed her, the wood supply for the east room was limited. The well was 50 yards out, and frozen by midnight. The nearest neighbor was 11 miles south on an impassable trail. "I'll need an extra axe then," Cora said. "For the wood." He gave her the axe. That evening she cooked, not the tentative, hopeful cooking of someone trying to make a good impression, the efficient, unfussy work of someone who understood that food was fuel and fuel was survival. Salted pork, fried hard, cornbread from meals she'd found in the larder, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Tobias ate everything on his plate without comment. From the beam above, the rustle of a horse blanket being adjusted. Third morning, Cora left a plate at the base of the ladder before she went to the well. When she came back, it was empty and licked clean. She refilled it without making any point of this. On the 4th day, Tobias went to the mine before dawn. Cora heard him leave, the particular sound of a man who had lived alone for years and developed no habit of moving quietly. There had never been anyone to wake. She had the cabin to herself until mid-morning. She used the time the way she always used unexpected solitude. She took inventory, not curiosity. Survival assessment, the need to know exactly what kind of place she occupied, what the exits were, what the resources were, what the threats were. She checked the gun cabinet, locked. Through the gaps, she could see the double-barreled shotgun and 2 rifles. She checked the north door, locked. When she stood close, she could hear the boy moving on the other side. Small, unhurried patterns, back and forth. A circuit he ran when he was awake and thinking. She checked the pantry. Adequate. The root cellar. Substantial. The man had provisioned seriously for winter. Then she found it. Under the floorboard, beside the east side bed. The one that sat proud of its neighbors by a quarter inch. The way boards sit when lifted and replaced many times. She found the ledger. Small. Rough leather cover. The pages soft with use. She opened it expecting almost anything. What she found stopped her cold. Names on the left, in Tobias's careful, unpracticed handwriting. The script of a man who had taught himself to write as an adult, who had never lost the deliberateness of that. Dates beside each name, numbers on the right. She turned to the first entry. Clara Higgins, October 1882. $180. She turned to the next. Beatrice Morrow, November 1882. 210, after page. 24 entries, every amount different. Every amount more. She ran the arithmetic quickly, more than the agency fee Tobias would have paid to bring each woman here. She read the ledger from start to finish. Then she read it again. He hadn't been driving them away. He'd been letting them go, every single one, paid enough on departure to start somewhere safe, somewhere new, with enough runway to get their feet under them. He had written down their names, not to count his conquests, not to catalog his cruelties, but to keep account of every woman who had come here in good faith, who had found something she hadn't been prepared for, and whom he had then, in his blunt and imperfect way, tried to set right. The ledger was not a monster's record. It was the record of a man who understood, at some level, that he had been complicit in something unfair, who couldn't undo the unfairness, but had done what he could about the practical consequences of it. Cora sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Above her, the boy moved along his beam in the small, deliberate patterns she was beginning. Direct out east. 3 boards east. Pause. 3 boards back. A circuit he ran when he was awake and thinking. She set the ledger on her knee. She tipped her chin toward the ceiling. Then she put the ledger back, exactly where she had found it. She replaced the board flush. She said nothing when Tobias came in at dusk, but something she had been holding at arm's length, allowing herself only the minimum, shifted its angle, not down entirely, just repositioned. She went back to the stove and put more wood on. When Tobias came in from the mine, he found the cabin warm. Supper on the table. Cora by the fire, with a book open on her knee, reading in the quiet, attentive posture of someone genuinely inside the story. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved across the fire, the food, the woman, a muscle in his jaw released, barely visible, there and gone. He sat down and ate. Days in the cabin had a rhythm, not a comfortable rhythm at first, more like 2 people occupying the same space without collision, the way you learned the geography of a dark room. But it was a rhythm, and rhythm, Cora had found, was the beginning of most things worth having. She mapped Tobias's patterns inside a day, up before light, stove stoked. At the mine by dawn, in at midday for 10 minutes. Food, water gone again, back at dusk. Ate, worked at the table. Trap chains, leather repairs, the endless small maintenance of a working claim. 30 words a day if she counted generously, some days fewer. He was not sullen. She had spent enough time with the ledger to know the difference now. She watched the way he moved through the cabin around Leo's orbit. He curved his path without drawing attention to the adjustment. Never approached directly, never cornered. The most considerate maneuvering she had ever seen a man perform, while pretending he wasn't performing anything at all. Not sullen, just someone who had learned that words cost more than they returned and who spent them accordingly. She respected that. She had her own economy of speech, though it came from different country, On the fourth morning, she found a way in. She was at the stove, back to the room. "I need someone to watch the east trail," she said. Tobias's hands paused over the trap chains. "3 knocks if you see a horse," she continued, adjusting the draft. "2 for a man on foot." She set the spoon down. "I'll make Johnny cake either way, but I'd like to know." No response from above. No movement from across the room. Tobias returned to his chains without comment. 2 hours passed. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the beam directly above the east window. Cora crossed to the window and checked the trail. A mule deer. A doe, picking her way along the frozen ground at the tree line. Her breath broke white in the cold air. Cora straightened. "Good eye," she said simply, and went back to the stove. 3 minutes passed. 2 more knocks. Faster this time. Tentative. She went to the window again. The trail was empty. The deer had moved on. Nothing there. She stood with her hand on the sill and thought it through. Then she understood. He was testing her, checking whether she would actually look, or whether the looking was performance. "Still a good eye," she said. To the room, to nobody in particular. From the beam above. A sound that existed just below the level of language. Not a hiss. Not a word. Something that lived in the register between the two, briefly, and then was gone. Tobias had stopped working on the traffic chains. He was holding the length of iron in both hands, his attention on the ceiling. His expression had been stripped of its usual containment. She recognized it now that she saw it plainly. Surprise, genuine and unguarded. That evening he said, to his coffee cup, not to her, "Nobody's ever given him a job before. He's not a wild animal," Cora said. "He acts like one, because that's what's worked for him." She turned a page of her book without rushing it. "An animal in a corner learns to bite. That doesn't make biting what it wants to do." Tobias was quiet for a stretch. "How do you know that?" he said at last. Cora kept her eyes on the page for a moment. "Because I've been in a corner," she said. She did not elaborate. He did not press. The sister had been 26 years old and full of laughter. That was the thing Tobias held most clearly, not her face, not her voice exactly, but the quality of her laughter, the way it surprised you every time, even after 1,000 hearings. Eliza laughed the way some people throw open windows, suddenly, completely, letting everything in at once. He remembered one afternoon, summer. The pines throwing long shadows across the meadow, the air warm and still. Still, the kind of afternoon that feels borrowed from somewhere better. Eliza running ahead of him through the grass, barefoot, calling something back over her shoulder that the distance swallowed. He chased her. She was faster. She was always faster. The light was gold and long, the way it gets in late afternoon when the day seems unwilling to end. Like even the sun didn't want to leave that particular meadow on that particular evening. He didn't know he drifted until Cora's voice came back, low, unhurried, reading aloud from the book on her knee. She wasn't reading to Leo. She was just reading, loud enough to fill the room, loud enough that the silence from the beam overhead had gone completely still. The concentrated stillness of someone working very hard, not to be caught listening. Tobias tipped his chin toward the ceiling, then back to Cora. She turned a page. He picked up the trap chain and did not set it down until she closed the book. On the 6th day, Cora wrote a letter. Early afternoon, Tobias at the mine. Leo on sentinel duty at the east window. She sat at the table with her pen and a folded piece of paper from the bottom of her trunk. She wrote carefully, the way you write when every word carries weight. 3 paragraphs. She stopped at the beginning of the 4th. She read what she had written. Then she sat with the pen in her hand. A city 3,000 miles away pressed through the paper at her. A narrow house, a particular street, a neighbor who had known the truth, a name she had not let herself write in 5 months. Margaret Howe. When Cora ran, she ran without warning, no note. No word. Nothing that might leave a trail. A trail would have gotten them both killed. She had known that then. She knew it now. Knowing it didn't make the fourth paragraph any easier to begin. She folded the letter. She held one corner over the lamp flame. The paper caught clean and quiet. She held it until she had to let it go, set the burning page in the cold hearth and watched it finish. Two careful knocks from the beam above the east window. She checked the trail, out of habit. Empty. He had heard something wrong in the room and was checking on her, in the only language he had. All clear, she said. Same tone as always, flat, factual, nothing owed to it. From above, the softest possible shift of weight on wood. She put the pen away and went back to the stove. That night, Tobias said to the fire in the deliberate way he had of raising things he'd been carrying a while. Why, the east room. Cora set her book on her knee. You said better sightlines, he continued, but the east window faces the trailhead, not the valley. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. You weren't worried about the view? No, she said. I wasn't. He nodded once, filing it away. She could see him adding it to whatever account he kept. The ledger of small observations, everything she hadn't said aloud. She thought about his ledger, under the floorboard, 24 names, 24 amounts. He hadn't stopped, even when everything told him to. There's something coming, she said. I don't know exactly when. But whatever it is, it followed me here. It has nothing to do with you or the boy. Tobias set the cup down. What kind of something? The kind with a badge, she said. He held her gaze across the room. The stove outside. The wind had swung northwest, a harder, colder direction, carrying the first real edge of what the month intended. All right, Tobias said that was all. She had braced for more questions or anger or the careful withdrawal of a man, recalculating his exposure. Instead, he said all right, and turned back to the fire. After a moment, he reached for his coffee, and the room was exactly what it had been before she spoke. Cora sat with that for a moment. Then she went back to her book. From the beam above, not a breath of movement. But she had the distinct sense of being heard by someone who had taken it all in and filed it somewhere careful. He arrived on a Tuesday in a private carriage that was too well kept for Orofino and too mud-spattered for Chicago. The man who stepped out wore a suit that had cost real money, a flat-brimmed hat, a clean-shaved face, the face of someone who treats his appearance as a professional instrument, perhaps 45, with the economy of movement of a man who spent most of his time watching other people and very little time being watched himself. He walked into the Orofino saloon without pausing to look at the building from outside, which meant he had already looked at it from a distance and extracted what he needed. Percy Dobbs was behind the bar. The man settled onto a stool, set a coin on the mahogany without being asked, waited for his whiskey. When Percy brought it, he reached into his coat and placed a second object on the bar, a badge, silver, the Pinkerton eye open and unblinking, Thomas Blakely. The man said, Detective, I'm looking for a woman. He laid a photograph beside the badge, a tintype slightly blurred at the edges, a woman's face, serious, dark-eyed, not looking at the camera so much as past it. She goes by an alias. Her real name is Cora Sterling. Wanted in Chicago for the murder of Alderman Arthur Sterling. He picked up his glass. $2,000 for her return. Percy Dobbs studied the photograph. Then he raised his eyes toward the window, toward the gray slope of the mountain beyond the glass. She came through about a week ago, he said carefully. Went up to the Montgomery claim. Blakely turned his glass on the bar. His finger tapped once on the mahogany. Stop, tell me about Montgomery, he said. Percy told him the silver mine, the solitary habits, the revolving door of brides. The repetition. Blakely listened without interruption. his glass untouched. When Percy finished, Blakely folded the photograph away. He picked up his drink and turned to read the room in the back corner, nursing a glass he'd been nursing for an hour. Jebediah Cole absorbed all of this without appearing to absorb any of it. His stomach had dropped about halfway through Percy's account. It had not recovered. By nightfall, Blakely had his men, two from a disbanded mining camp, men who needed money and had stopped being particular about the source. Zeke Cobb was missing half his right ear. The result of a Deadwood disagreement that the other man had won. Dutch Miller was quiet, accurate, and asked no questions, which was exactly what his reputation said about him. They gathered at a back table. After the dinner crowd thinned. Blakely spread a map across the scarred wood. His finger traced the ridge line of the Bitterroot Range, stopped at a notation near the Upper Timber Montgomery claim. He held there a beat. He held there 2 beats. Regret crossed his face before he buried it. Fast, involuntary. Gone before Cobb could have registered it. Blakely's finger moved on. The bounty is $2,000 for the woman. Sterling wants her back in Chicago. He set his glass down. The mountain man she's staying with. He's sitting on a silver vein he mines alone. The law up here is thin. If Montgomery happens to be in the wrong place when we collect the woman, a pause that did the work a sentence would have done. We split whatever's in that cabin. Cobb's grin went up on one side, the grin of a man who had learned early that cruelty was easier than kindness, and had built his whole life around that discovery. What about the kid? He said. Heard, there's a brat up there. Blakely turned his eyes on Cobb. The look had nothing in it. No anger, no hesitation, no visible process of any kind. The flat terminal quality of a door being shut from the inside. I said what I said. Blakely replied. In the corner, Jebediah Cole set his glass down with great care. He studied the table in the back. He studied the mountain through the window, the upper slopes invisible now, behind the night and the weather. Whatever was happening up there, sealed away behind it. He thought about going to the sheriff. He ran that conversation in his head and arrived at its conclusion inside 30 seconds. He thought about the boy, bare feet, green eyes that tracked everything. He thought about a woman who had asked about sight lines before she'd taken off her coat. He got up, left 2 coins on the bar, and walked out into the cold. The snow had started while he was inside. Fine, dry, serious snow. The kind that means business, calming straight down in the still air. No wind behind it yet, just falling with the patience of something that intends to accumulate. Jebediah stood on the boardwalk with his hat brim collecting white. He stood there for a while. Then he went home. The snow kept falling. Up on the mountain, in the warm cabin with the fire going. A woman's voice carried through the dark, reading aloud. Nobody up there knew yet what was making its way up the trail. But the mountain knew. The mountain always knew. By the 5th day, Leo came down from the rafters and sat at the table. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask permission. He simply appeared at the base of the ladder one morning. Bare feet on the cold floorboards, arms loose at his sides. He stood with the measuring patience of someone who has reached a provisional conclusion. Cora did not turn from the stove. She moved the skillet to the cooler side. A piece of wood, adjusted the draft. She reached for 2 plates, then a third. Set them on the table in a row without comment. The third plate, in the place that had always been empty, set there the same way she'd set the others, as if it had always belonged. Leo stood for another moment. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down. Tobias, at the far end of the table with his coffee, turned a page of the almanac. He kept his eyes on it. The 3 of them ate breakfast together without a word exchanged. It was the finest silence Cora had ever sat inside. That evening, Tobias stayed at the table after supper. He had a piece of harness leather that needed rewrapping. He worked it with an awl and heavy thread, while Cora read by the lamp. The sound of it filled the room, the patient push and pull of thread through leather, steady and unhurried, more companionable than conversation would have been. After a while, Cora began to hum. She was not aware of it at first. It surfaced below the level of intention, a fragment of melody, low and formless, the kind that lives in the body rather than the memory. Half a tune with no name attached, 4 or 5 bars in, she noticed. She cut a glance at Tobias. He had gone very still. Not tense, not unsettled. The stillness of a man who has followed a thread of recognition somewhere interior and hasn't come back yet. His eyes were on the leather in his hands without seeing it. Then he blinked, picked up the awl, continued. Neither of them spoke. Cora went back to her page. But the paragraph blurred. She read the same lines twice without taking them in. Outside, the high pines breathed against each other in the dark. The 6th day brought gray skies and a harder wind off the passes. Tobias was at the mine before first light. Leo was on sentinel duty at the east window. Cora sat at the table alone, with her pen and a folded piece of paper. She wrote carefully, the way you write when every word carries weight, 3 paragraphs. She stopped at the beginning of the 4th. She read what she had written. Then she sat with the pen in her hand, in a city 3,000 miles away, pressing through the paper. A narrow house, a particular street, a neighbor who had known the truth, a name she had not let herself write 5 months. Margaret Howe. When Cora ran, she ran without warning, without warning. No note, no word, nothing that might leave a trail. A trail would have gotten them both killed. She had known that then. She knew it now. Knowing it didn't make the 4th paragraph any easier to begin. She folded the letter. She held one corner over the lamp flame. The paper caught clean and quiet. She held it until she had to let it go. Set the burning page in the cold hearth. Watched it finish. 2 careful knocks from the beam above the east window. She checked the trail out of habit. Empty. He had heard something wrong in the room. He was checking on her. In the only language he had. All clear, she said. Flat, factual. Nothing owed to it. From above, the softest possible shift of weight on wood. She put the pen away and went back to the stove. On the 7th evening, something shifted in the cabin's temperature. Not the air. Something underneath the air. Tobias came in from the mine at dusk and did not go directly to his chair. He stood at the table and looked at the food she had set out. Then he sat down across from her, not at the far end. Across, he picked up the coffee cup and held it with both hands. Leo was in his usual position on the beam, but his feet were hanging down rather than tucked beneath him. A small thing. Cora had learned to read small things. The boy needs a job, she said. Not looking up from the pot she was tending, Tobias set the cup down. He's not ready for... I didn't ask if he was ready, Cora said evenly. I said he needs one. Tobias held the cup in both hands and said nothing. Surviving isn't the same as living, she continued. He survives. Every day. He's good at it. But surviving alone is just waiting. She turned from the stove and held Tobias' gaze directly. He needs to know he's useful to someone. Not just tolerated. Tobias looked at his coffee. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind worked through the timber in long, slow waves. After a while, he said, he doesn't trust anyone enough for that. He trusts you, Cora said. Tobias looked up. He came down the ladder on the 5th day, she said. He sat at your table. He eats the food you leave. He watches the trail when I ask him to. She turned back to the stove. That's not a wild animal, Mr. Montgomery. That's a boy who doesn't know yet what he is. Tobias was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Cora thought the conversation was over. Then he said, very low, to the table rather than to her, I don't know how to teach him that. Cora set the spoon down. She turned around. She had not expected that, not the honesty of it. not the plain, undefended weight of it. She looked at the man across the table, the scarred face, the massive hands wrapped around the small cup, the absolute absence of pretense in what he had just said. Nobody does. She said, "You just stay, and eventually they figure out what that means." Tobias held her gaze. Something passed between them that had no name and did not require one. From the beam above, a sound. Barely there, barely a sound at all. The quiet exhale of a child who has been listening very carefully and has heard something worth keeping. The 8th day was the finest one they'd had. The sky broke clear for the first time in 2 weeks. A hard, clean blue, the kind of blue that only exists above 4,000 feet in late November. The light came off the snow in long horizontal shafts. It turned the frost on the cabin windows into something that looked deliberately made. Tobias did not go to the mine. He did not explain why. He simply stayed in the yard through the morning, working on the drainage channel along the cabin's east side. Methodical, purposeful, the kind of work you do when you want to be near something without being asked about it. Cora worked inside. She made bread. Real bread. From starter, she had been tending for 6 days. The smell of it filled the cabin. She was shaping the second loaf when she heard it. The front door opened. She did not turn immediately. She had learned not to make a production of noticing Leo. She kept her hands in the dough, listening. Small bare feet on the floorboards, the deliberate, testing weight of someone navigating a new route. She heard him cross the room. She heard him stop. Then the front door opened again. She turned in time to see it closing. She wiped her hands on her apron. She went to the east window. In the yard, Tobias was working the drainage channel with a short-handled spade standing at the edge of the porch, bare feet on the boards despite the cold. Watching, Tobias did not look up. He kept working. The spade turned the frozen earth at the channel's edge, steady strokes, no hurry. A minute passed. Then Leo came down the porch steps, one at a time, both feet on each step. He crossed the yard to within 6 feet of Tobias and stopped. He watched the spade work. He watched the way Tobias read the frozen ground, finding the angle, adjusting the stroke, clearing each blockage before moving to the next. Tobias worked for another 10 minutes without once acknowledging the boy's presence, not ignoring him, allowing him. There is a difference. After a while, Leo crouched down on his heels. He picked up a stone from the pile of cleared earth, turned it in his fingers, set it aside, picked up another. Tobias paused. He pointed to the growing pile of stones and debris cleared from the channel. He pointed to the far edge of the yard where the ground dropped away. He did not speak. He went back to work. Leo looked at the pile. He looked at the far edge. Then he picked up 2 stones in each small hand. He carried them to the edge of the yard and dropped them. He came back. He did it again. Cora stood at the east window with flour still on her hands. She watched the man work the channel and the boys carry stones across the frozen yard, back and forth, neither speaking, neither needing to. She went back to the bread. She did not make a point of what she had seen, but she held it quickly, the way you hold something that changes the shape of the morning. That afternoon, Leo came to the table without prompting, not because food was there, because Tobias was there. He climbed onto the chair at the corner nearest Tobias's end, pulled his feet up, sat with his chin on his knees, watching Tobias oil a trap chain with the slow, meticulous attention of someone studying a craft. Tobias did not look up, but after a while he shifted the chain slightly, angled it toward the boy, so Leo could see the work better. Without making a production of the adjustment, Cora read her book by the lamp. She did not say anything about what was happening. At the other end of the table, she turned pages. She was aware, with a precision she could not have put into words, that the 3 of them were occupying the same room differently than they had occupied it 8 days ago. The difference was not dramatic. It was the difference between three people alone in the same space and three people together Tuesday morning, 8 days after Cora arrived. The sky at first light was the color of a bruise that hadn't finished forming. Iron gray, pressing down flat and heavy, no wind at dawn. In the Bitterroot in November, that was not reassurance. It was the held breath before. Cora was at the stove when Tobias came in from checking the mine entrance. His pace had changed. She registered it before she could have named what specifically was different. Just a shift in the way he occupied the room, his eyes moving to the windows in sequence as he crossed to the north wall. He stood at the north window for a moment. Then he went to the gun cabinet. Cora set her coffee cup down without a sound. "What did you hear?" she said. "Nothing yet." He was working the lock. Ravens came off the lower timber about 10 minutes ago. Both of them together due east. He lifted the double-barreled shotgun clear and reached for shells. They don't leave that ridge in pairs unless something pushed them. She was already moving. She crossed to the east window and checked the trail. Empty for 200 yards before it bent around the granite shoulder and dropped from sight. She went to her room. The Winchester came down from its pegs, loaded. She levered around into the chamber. A smooth, practiced motion, no ceremony in it. She came back out. Tobias was at the gun port he'd cut into the north wall years ago. A thin vertical slot, wide enough to sight through, narrow enough to be invisible from outside. "4 horses," he said. His voice dropped low. Coming up the last switchback, riding spread out, too much distance between them for a social call. He stepped back from the wall. On the beam above the cold fireplace, absolute silence. Leo had registered the shift in the cabin's atmosphere, the way animals register a change in pressure, not with his ears exactly. With everything else, Tobias crossed to the front door and dropped the iron bar into its brackets, a massive timber bar. The kind of engineering that said this moment had been imagined before, alone in the dark, and planned for. "Get away from the windows," he said. Then he turned to her, not with accusation, with the look of a man who has been running arithmetic in the back of his mind for 8 days, and has just arrived at the sum. "The badge you mentioned," he said. Cora held the Winchester across her body. "His name is Blakely," she said. "He's Pinkerton. He's working for my husband." Tobias waited. "My name is Cora Sterling," she said. "My husband was an alderman in Chicago, Arthur Sterling." She kept her voice level, not because she didn't feel it. She felt it the way you feel an old injury in cold weather. Bond deep and dull and intimate. He was a man who did what he wanted, and what he wanted was to own things, property, favors, people, a beat. For 5 years, me, the stove ticked. Outside down the slope, a horse blew through its nose 3 months ago. He locked me in the cellar, told me he'd leave me there until I was tractable. She said the word with a flat precision that made it worse than anger would have. He'd done it before. A day. 2 days. This time he left me 3 days before he came back down. Her grip on the Winchester did not shift. He'd left his hunting rifle on the cabinet near the door. I don't think he forgot it. I think he put it there to remind me. It was within sight and out of reach. She paused. He was wrong about that. Tobias stood with his back against the wall beside the gun port. The muscle under the scar on his left cheek had gone rigid. I took his money. I bought papers under a different name. I signed the agency contract because I needed somewhere so remote. She searched a half-second. So actively frightening that no reasonable man would think to look for me. She held his gaze straight. "I'm sorry I lied on the contract. I'm not sorry I came here." She had steadied herself for whatever came next. Anger, the cold pragmatism of a man cutting his losses. She had been managing men's responses for a long time. She had learned to read the early signs. She had not learned to read Tobias Montgomery. He turned to the ammunition shelf, took down a second box of rifle cartridges, crossed the room and held it out. She took it. "There's trespassing," he said, and turned back to the gun port. Outside, a voice crossed the clearing. Large. Practiced the voice of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how much volume the situation required. Tobias Montgomery. A pause. "Letting the name settle. This is Agent Thomas Blakely of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. The property is surrounded. You are harboring a wanted fugitive. Send the woman out, hands bound, and you can go back to your mourning." Tobias walked to the front door. He spoke through the timber. His voice carried the way a hand axe carries, without decoration. Right to the point. "The only thing I'm harboring," he said, "is a bad temper, Pinkerton. You have until I count 5 to point those horses back the way they came." "A beat of dead air. Suit yourself," Blakely said. The first shot took out the upper window on the north wall. Glass came down on the floorboards in a bright cascade. The cold poured through the gap immediately, sharp as a blade. Cora was at the window before the glass finished falling, Winchester on the sill. Breath held. Her eye found the muzzle flash in the tree line 40 yards. Slightly left of the large pine. She fired. A shout from the brush. Dutch Miller dropped his rifle in the snow and grabbed his shoulder. The shooting opened up after that. Rounds struck the cabin logs with a sound like hammers on stone. The walls held. Tobias had built those walls to outlast avalanche and grizzly. The slugs bit into the outer inch of timber and went no further. The cabin was not a house. It was a fortification, and it knew its job. Tobias moved to the floor hatch near the east wall, a small opening at ground level, barely wide enough for a man his size. Cut years ago and never needed until now. He held Cora's gaze across the room for 1 second. She was already working the north window. Fire lever. Move, fire. She did not need instruction. She was buying time and keeping their attention on the north face while he circled. He went through the hatch. The cold hit like a wall. He pressed against the south logs, the shotgun against his chest. He listened. 2 guns working the north face in a rough arc. Blakely and Cobb, spread 30 yards apart. Dutch Miller no longer in the conversation. Tobias began to move through the deep drift along the cabin's base, using the sound of the shooting to cover his own. Inside, Cora worked the window. She counted her rounds. She did not think about anything, except the next position and the next shot. Then she felt it. Something pressed against the back of her left leg. She was mid-lever on the next round when she felt it. Light, warm, the unmistakable weight of a small body crouched against the back of her knee. She did not stop. She fired through the broken frame, shifted left along the wall, fired again. A return shot clipped chips from the frame 6 inches above her head. Then a pause. Blakely's men reloading. 8 seconds, maybe 10. She dropped her chin. Leo was crouched at her feet, not standing, not holding anything, back flat against the wall. Turned toward the cabin door. Jaw set. His whole slight frame contracting with it shot the way a muscle contracts when it can't help it. He was trembling. She could feel it through the contact at her leg, the fine involuntary trembling of a body frightened to its bones. That has decided to stay anyway. He had come down from the beam. He had not gone to the corner, had not gone under the bed, had not found any of the 12 better hiding places the cabin offered a child his size. He had come to her feet. Cora reached down without redirecting her eyes from the window. She placed her hand on the back of his head, one touch steady and certain, the way you touch something to confirm. You know it is there. The shooting started again. Her hand went back to the rifle, but Leo did not move. He pressed his back to the wall and he stayed. Every shot, pulling that flinch out of him, and him staying anyway. The boy, who had hidden from the world for 3 years, had chosen, in the loudest moment of his life, not to hide. She had not thought about the cellar in 3 months. She had trained herself away from it, keeping her mind moving forward. The next town, the next train, the next decision. The moment the mind stopped, it went back, but crouched at the window with the shooting and the cold air nipping through the broken glass and Leo's weight against her leg. It arrived without permission. The smell first, old wood and cold stone, the particular dark that has mass to it, heavier than regular, dark, deliberate. 3 days, no light after the first night, Sterling's footsteps above her at his usual hours, unhurried, conducting the ordinary business of the house, as though nothing unusual was occurring, as though she simply wasn't there. She had stopped counting hours at some point, counted other things instead, cracks in the plaster ceiling, the drip from the north wall, the sounds the house made when the temperature dropped. On the 3rd day she heard him on the stairs, slow, enjoying the approach. She was already standing when the door opened. She had been standing for an hour, because sitting felt like agreement. The rifle on the cabinet by the door. He had thought the distance was enough. He was wrong about that. She had not been back in any dark since. Outside, the shooting stopped. The silence arrived all at once, sudden and complete, broken only by the wind in the upper timber and the small settling sounds of the stove. Then Tobias's voice close. Certain. Drop it. Cora lifted the iron bar from its brackets and stepped out onto the porch. The clearing. The snow had come during the fight, fine and steady, sifting through the pine canopy, laying itself over everything with the patience of something that has no deadline. It covered the churned ground, the brass shell casings, the dark marks where things had happened. Dutch Miller sat against a tree with his shoulder packed. Out of the fight, Zeke Cobb lay face down 30 yards east of the cabin, breathing, not moving. Thomas Blakely was backed against the large ponderosa at the clearing's edge. His revolver was in his right hand. His left hand had risen slightly. Not quite a surrender, more a pause. He was facing Tobias, who had come up out of the snow in the dark, the shotgun's twin barrels resting with absolute patience beside Blakely's ear. Cora raised the Winchester. Blakely's eyes cut to her. "You won't," he started. She held his gaze. She did not lower the rifle. She did not speak. And the totality of that, the woman on the porch who had run out of things to prove, the mountain man at his shoulder who had never once said anything. He didn't mean. The snow, coming down through all of it, reached Thomas Blakely in a way that any sentence would have failed to. His finger found the trigger. It rested there. 3 full seconds it rested there. Tobias did not shift. The shotgun did not waver. His face carried the same quality it always carried. Not anger, not display. Just the settled patience of a man who has made his decisions and closed the ledger on them. Blakely's eyes moved from Cora to Tobias. He held there. Recognition moved across his face. Not gradual, not considered. The involuntary kind, the kind the body produces before the mind has a chance to suppress it. His jaw tightened. His eyes tracked the scars on the left side of Tobias's face. The pale gray eyes above the barrel. The particular set of those shoulders. "I know you," Blakely said. The words came out quieter than he intended. Tobias held his position. "You know who I used to be," he said. Something broke open behind Blakely's eyes, fast, unwelcome. The expression of a man confronted with the distance between 2 versions of himself. His jaw worked once. His gaze went somewhere that wasn't the clearing, wasn't the mountain, somewhere 15 years back, in a Colorado mining camp hearing room, where a younger man, with a clean badge and a still intact conscience, had stood before a magistrate. and told the truth about a stranger because it was true, and because it was right, and because those two things had still been sufficient reason. His finger left the trigger. He held Tobus's gaze for a long moment. Then he turned his eyes to the revolver in his hand. He studied it the way you study something you've carried so long. You stopped seeing it. Yes, he said. The word came out, flat and tired and honest. I suppose I do. The revolver fell into the snow. The snow kept falling. It fell, without hurry, the way serious snow falls, not rushing to prove anything, just steady and thorough and committed to the work. It covered the yard in a clean white layer. It made everything underneath it provisional. The dark marks in the ground, the scattered shell casings, the places where men had stood and made decisions. Decisions they would carry the rest of their lives. Tobias Montgomery lowered the shotgun. He didn't put it away. He held it down at his side, 2 fingers on the grip, the way a man holds a tool he is done using for the moment, but not done needing. Blakely stood against the Ponderosa with the revolver in the snow at his feet. He had the look of someone who has just set down a very heavy thing and isn't sure what his hands know how to do without it. Dutch Miller was still against his tree. His shoulder had stopped bleeding as much. He was studying the ground. Zeke Cobb had not moved. Tobias looked at all of this with the calm assessment of a man taking stock after a storm. Then he looked at Blakely. "Your man on the left," he said. "He needs a doctor. He'll make it down the mountain if he rides, now." Blakely turned to Dutch Miller, then back to Tobias. Something moved in his face. Not gratitude exactly. An acknowledgement that for what was happening here was not the word he had arrived with. The other one, Blakely said. Breathing, Tobias said. He'll wake up with a jaw that reminds him of his choices for about a month. A long silence. The snow came down between them. "What do you want?" Blakely said. He said it without deflection, which was the first honest thing Cora had heard him say. Tobias took a slow breath of cold air, let it out even slower. "You're going to get your men on their horses," he said. "You're going to ride down to Orofino, and you're going to send a telegram to Chicago." He held Blakely's eyes without blinking. "The telegram is going to say that Cora Sterling died in a blizzard. Crossing Deadman's Pass, unrecovered. No remains." Blakely was quiet. "Sterling will want proof," he said. "Sterling is going to get a telegram from a Pinkerton agent," Tobias said. "That'll be his proof. Because the alternative," he paused. The pause had weight. "Is that I keep you on this mountain until spring and see what story the snow tells when it thaws." It was not a theatrical threat. That was what made it effective. It was delivered in the same register as everything else Tobias Montgomery said. Plain and certain, backed by the full conviction of a man who had never once said something he didn't mean. Blakely looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the mountain around them, the dark wall of the timber, the depth of the sky, the sheer indifferent scale of the place, which did not care what any of them decided, which would stand here long after all their decisions had weathered to nothing. He understood, not just the threat, the other thing underneath it. He was being given a door by a man who knew, who remembered, or had figured out that Blakely had once, a long time ago, given him one. A hearing room in Colorado, a young Pinkerton agent on his feet, telling the truth about a man he didn't know, because the right thing and the easy thing were not the same, and he had chosen accordingly. Blakely had been that man once. He was looking at the evidence of what he had become since. He bent down. He picked up his revolver. He put it in his holster without pointing it at anyone. "Understood," he said. He walked to Dutch Miller and helped the man to his feet. He whistled for the horses. He hauled Zeke Cobb upright by the collar, propped him against a tree until Cobb's legs remembered what they were, for He did not look at Cora. He did not look at Tobias again. He got onto his horse. He pointed it down the trail. He did not look back. The other two horses followed, picking their careful way through the fresh snow. The sound of them diminished down the slope. Then there was nothing left of Thomas Blakely but the prints in the snow and a Pinkerton badge on the ground. Where his revolver had been, Cora stood on the porch and watched him go. She waited until the sound was entirely gone. Then she let out a breath that had been in her chest for 3 months. Tobias came up the porch steps. He stopped beside her and turned his face out toward the clearing. The snow was already smoothing over the evidence of the morning, patent and absolute, the way snow is. They stood there for a while without talking, the kind of quiet that follows. Violence has a particular quality, not peaceful exactly, more like the air after a thunderstorm when everything is still charged. But the charge has nowhere left to go. Cora had lived through enough bad mornings to know that the body takes time to believe it's over. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing had steadied. But somewhere underneath all that, the machinery was still running at speed. She let it wind down at its own pace. After a while, Tobias said, "To the middle distance," not quite to her. "I kept the ledger." Cora turned her head. "I know," she said. "I found it." He was quiet for a moment. Not surprised, she thought. He had probably known for days. "I told myself it was what I owed them," he said. For coming all this way on false pretenses, he turned the empty coffee cup in his hands. He had carried it out from the cabin without realizing, apparently, but that wasn't the only reason. "No," Cora said. "Every time I wrote a name down, I told myself it was the last one, that I'd manage it by myself after that." He looked at the cup. "That I'd figure out how to be what the boy needed without bringing someone else into the difficulty of it." "But you didn't stop," Cora said. "No." He looked out at the mountain. "I didn't stop." Cora understood. She understood it the way you understand things that live in the same country as your own experience. Not by analysis, by recognition. He hadn't kept the ledger as punishment. He'd kept it because it was a record of the times he had failed to give up, and not giving up was the only thing he knew with certainty was right. Even when everything else was wrong, the ledger was proof, for no audience but himself, that he had kept trying. She looked at him across the cold air. "There's no more names to add," she said. Tobias turned his head. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes, direct and unhurried. "No," he said. "There isn't." The snow settled around them, somewhere in the high timber. A raven called once, a single declarative sound, then went quiet. After a while, they went back inside. That night, the wind came. It came from the northwest, which in the Bitterroot country in November means it has traveled a long way. It picked up everything the high passes had to offer, and delivered all of it without apology. It moved through the pine canopy in long sustained chords. It drove the snow horizontal for a while before midnight. It made the cabin timbers creak. Cora was accustomed to it by now. She sat on the porch bench past midnight with her coat buttoned to the throat, watching the valley below disappear behind the weather. The lights of Orofino were gone, buried in snow and dark and distance. The mountain had closed in around the cabin, until the whole world was the clearing and the timber and the sky pressing down white. She was not afraid. She noticed that specifically. The way you notice the absence of something you have lived with so long you stopped registering it. She had been afraid, with varying degrees of management, for 3 months. Afraid on the train, afraid in the stagecoach, afraid every morning when she woke in the East Room, going through the inventory of whether anything had changed in the night. Tonight she was cold and tired, and still a little wired from the morning's violence. Her right shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. But she was not afraid. She heard the door behind her. Tobias came out with 2 cups of coffee. She had not asked for them. She did not argue with them. He set one on the bench beside her. He stayed standing, looking out at the storm, the way men who live alone look at weather, not with concern, with the attention of someone maintaining a long acquaintance. They were quiet for a while. "You lied on the contract," Tobias said. There it was. She had been waiting for him to arrive at it on his own schedule. "I did," she said. She held his gaze. "I needed a place to be, and a reason to be there that would hold up to basic scrutiny. The agency contract was the best option I could construct on short notice." She paused. "I imagine you'd like the fee returned." Tobias looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out. His hand was large and rough and scarred across the knuckles, a hand that had spent decades in harder use than most. It moved slowly, with the deliberate care of someone who is very aware of their own size, who has learned to move carefully around things that might not want to be touched. He found a loose strand of her hair caught by the wind across her cheek. He tucked it back behind her ear, a single gesture, simple and complete. Then his hand came back to his side. "The fee," he said, with the absolute straightness of a man choosing his words one at a time, "is the last thing I'm thinking about." Cora sat, very still. She was aware of the warmth that remained in the air where his hand had been. In the particular way you are aware of things that are over, before you were ready for them to be. "I came here to hide," she said. "That's the truth of it. Not for you. Not for Leo. For me. To disappear into a place nobody would think to look." She looked at her coffee. "I want you to know that. I want there to be nothing between us that I haven't said plainly." "All right," Tobias said, "and I want you to know that somewhere between the Ledger and the Sentinel post—" She paused. "And the evenings with the fire going, she looked up at him. I stopped planning the next departure." The wind moved through the pines. Tobias looked at her for a long time with those steady gray eyes. "I noticed," he said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the near relative of one. She filed it carefully. She suspected those were not produced often, and that they meant more for the rarity. They finished their coffee in the cold. The storm talked to itself in the timber. After a while they went back inside to the fire. The morning after came in gray and clean. The storm had passed in the night. It left behind the profound quiet that follows serious snowfall, a hush so complete it has texture to it. The whole mountain muffled under 2 fresh feet of white. The sky was pale, not quite blue, the kind of sky that has just finished doing something large and is resting. Cora was at the stove. She was making porridge, cornmeal, slow cooked, with a little salt, the kind of thing that asks nothing of you except patience. She stirred it without urgency. The fire was good. The cabin was warm. Through the east window, the fresh snow on the pines caught the early light. Tobias had gone out to check the mine entrance and the drainage channel. Standard work after heavy snow. The kind of maintenance that keeps a claim from flooding when the melt starts. She could hear him distantly. The particular sound of a shovel on frozen ground. She was alone. She stirred the pot and thought about nothing in particular, which was something she had not been able to do for a long time. The mind, when it has been clenched hard around a problem for months, does not immediately know what to do with open space. But it was learning. She could feel it, the gradual tentative unclenching, like fingers warming slowly after cold. She hummed. The same fragment as before. That nameless melody, low and unhurried. It came without decision, from somewhere below the level of intention. She was 3 or 4 bars into it when she heard the sound, a sound from the base of the ladder. She turned. Leo was standing on the floor. Not on the ladder, not on the beam, on the floor, in the center of the room, bare feet on the cold boards, the way he stood when he had made up his mind about something. He was holding the iron poker, not like a weapon, the way a child holds something when they're not sure what to do with their hands, gripped at one end, the weight of it, pulling slightly, keeping him tethered to something solid. He was looking at her. Then he looked at the door, then back at her. And he crossed the room. He walked past her, past the table, to the cabin door. He opened it himself, both hands on the iron handle, all his slight weight against it until the latch gave. He stepped out onto the porch. Cora moved to the east window. Outside, in the white blanketed yard, Tobias had heard the door. He had straightened from the drainage channel. He was looking at the porch, shovel in hand. Leo stood at the top of the porch steps. He looked at the yard, at the snow, at the places where things had happened the day before. He looked at them carefully, the way a child looks at something he needs to understand. Then he looked at Tobias. He came down the porch steps, one at a time, both feet on each step before the next, unhurried. He crossed the yard in his bare feet, the cold snow, the white world, the open air he had not willingly entered in the presence of any stranger since Denver. He stopped in front of Tobias. He looked up at the man, the scarred face, the frost-touched beard, the pale eyes looking down at him with an expression that had no name Tobias would have been able to supply, but that lived in the neighborhood of the word undone. Leo reached out. He placed his small hand over Tobias's large one, where it rested on the shovel handle, palm to knuckles, light as anything. He looked up. "Are the bad men gone?" The voice was rough and small, a voice that hadn't been used in a long time. You could hear the disuse in it, the slight unevenness, like a hinge working for the first time in years. But it was clear, each word placed with care, a question that was also, underneath itself, a statement about who was being trusted with the answer. Tobias looked down at the small hand on top of his. Cora, at the window, watched his face. She had seen Tobias impassive. She had seen him contained. She had seen him quiet in the way that very large men are quiet when they are doing careful work. She had not seen this. She did not have a word for this. The thing that happened to his face in that moment, standing in the snow with a 7-year-old boy's hand resting on his, it was not weakness. It was the opposite. It was the expression of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and has just been, without warning, relieved of it. He did not cry. He had not cried since his sister's funeral. He did not cry now. But his free hand came up and rested, briefly, on the boy's shoulder. "Yes," he said. His voice was steady, the way his voice was always steady, but this time with something additional in it, a frequency the instrument had not known it could produce. "They're gone," Leo considered this. He received it the way he received everything, seriously, with his whole attention, turning it over. Then he nodded. The nod of a man settling an account. He turned and walked back to the cabin, up the steps, through the door, past Cora at the window without looking at her, and then he stopped. He stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned. He looked at her directly, those green eyes, clear and level, carrying something in them that had not been there 9 days ago, when she had walked through this door and looked up into the rafters and seen a cornered and frightened child looking back. He held up the poker. He looked at it, then at her. Then he set it down on the floor with deliberate care, not dropping it, not throwing it, placing it down, the way you place down something you have decided you no longer need. The sound of iron on wood rang through the quiet cabin, sibilant and final as a bell. And then he crossed the room and walked into her arms. She was already on her knees. She did not remember going down. Her body had simply gotten there, the way your body does when your mind is occupied with something larger. She felt him hit her, the full slight weight of a 7-year-old boy who had been eating properly for the first time in years, but was still thin, still bird-boned, still smaller than he should have been. She put her arms around him and held on. He buried his face in the wool of her coat. His shoulders were shaking, not screaming, not hissing, just shaking, the way a body shakes when it has been holding itself together by pure will for a very long time, and has finally, in one exhaled breath, let itself stop. Cora held on. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the holding didn't already say better. Behind her she heard Tobias come through the door. She heard him stop. She heard, after a moment, the sound of the shovel being set against the wall. Carefully. Hey, the way you set things down when you are trying not to disturb something. Then she felt it. A large hand placed gently on Leo's back, not gripping. Just there. Present, the three of them stayed like that for a while. In the warm cabin with the fire going, the snow bright through the windows, the iron poker lying on the floor where it would stay from that day forward, because nobody ever picked it up again. Come spring thaw. The first person to make it up, Deadman's Pass, was nobody expected. Old Jebediah Cole had driven that route for 11 years without once leaving the road. He was 62 years old. His knees ached in cold weather. He had perfectly good reasons not to go up that trail in early April. The snow was still uncertain underfoot. The high switchbacks were slick with meltwater. He went anyway. He told himself he was checking on a wheel rut that had been troubling the pass since winter. He told himself it was a practical matter, a professional concern, the kind of thing a responsible stagecoach driver attends to as a matter of course. He did not convince himself, but he went anyway. The trail was slow. His horse picked its way carefully through the last of winter's leavings, patches of dirty snow in the shade, soft mud in the sun, the whole mountain in the process of deciding what season it wanted to be. The pines were beginning to show their new growth, the very tips of the branches brightening to a yellow-green, almost luminous in the April light. He came around the last switchback. The clearing opened up before him. The cabin sat where it had always sat, solid as the mountain it was built on. Both chimneys going, a wood pile along the south wall, stacked with the thoroughness of someone who had learned their lesson about winter supply. The yard was churned mud and patches of snow, with the evidence of several months of active occupation overlaid on it. Boot prints of various sizes, wood chips, a length of rope hung between two trees for no immediately obvious purpose. On the porch steps, sitting in the thin April sunshine, was a boy, bare feet on the bottom step, watching a raven at the tree line with the focused, unhurried attention of a naturalist conducting a survey. He heard the horse and looked up. He did not flinch. He did not run. He looked at Jebediah with a calm, direct assessment of someone who has decided the world is provisionally manageable. Jebediah brought his horse to a stop. He looked at the boy. The boy looked at him. "You'd be Leo," Jebediah said. The boy nodded once, straightforward like a man confirming an appointment, from inside the cabin through the open window, because someone had opened the windows, which struck Jebediah as significant. A voice. Jebediah Cole. A pause. "If that's you, there's coffee on." He dismounted slowly. His knees made their usual observations about this decision. He tied the horse to the porch rail. He stood for a moment with his hat in his hands. Leo had gone back to watching the raven. Jebediah climbed the steps and stood in the doorway. He had expected. He didn't know exactly what he'd expected. He had driven women up this mountain for 11 years, driven them back down again in various states of distress, and had constructed, from all of that data, an image of what the Montgomery cabin looked like on the inside. He had been wrong about all of it. The room was warm, not just heated, warm, the way rooms are warm when they are lived in properly. When the warmth is a byproduct of the living, rather than a project in itself. There was bread cooling on the table, books on the shelf with bent spines, read recently, read often. A child's drawing pinned to the wall beside the window, rough pencil lines that might have been a horse. Or possibly a very ambitious dog. A woman was at the stove. Dark hair. Practical clothes. The efficient movements of someone at home in a kitchen. She did not turn around. A man was at the table, working on something with his hands. He looked up when Jebediah came in, those pale gray eyes. Steady, as always, the scarred face, the same, but something around it was different, something in the way he sat, the way he occupied the space, a quality of settledness that had not been there before. In the twice-a-year glimpses Jebediah had gotten of him on the main street of Orofino, he looked like a man who had come to an agreement with something. "Sit down," Tobias said. Not an order. The easiest kind of invitation, the kind that doesn't require any performance in return. Jebediah sat down. Cora set coffee in front of him without asking how he took it, which suggested she had been told or had guessed, or simply had the confidence of someone who knows that hot coffee in April after a mountain ride does not require customization. He sat there for an hour. He drank 2 cups. He ate bread with butter. He watched the boy come in and out, Leo, move through the cabin and the yard, and back again with the easy freedom of a child who owns his world, who has assessed it thoroughly and found it safe. He came and stood beside Tobias for a while, watching what the man was carving. Tobias shifted the work slightly so the boy could see it better. Without making a project of the adjustment, Jebediah watched all of this. He had the feeling of a man who has been shown the solution to a problem he had given up solving. That same morning, before Jebediah arrived, before Leo had come down the steps to sit in the April sun, Cora had done something she had not been able to do all winter. She had sat down and written a letter, 3 paragraphs, clear and plain with nothing in them that wasn't true, an address in Chicago at the top, a name she had not written in 5 months. She did not stop at the 4th paragraph this time. She finished it. She folded it. She sealed it. She held it in her hands for a moment. This thing she had been unable to send all those months, because sending it meant putting a return address on it, and a return address meant a place to be found. She wrote the return address, Montgomery Claim, Orofino, Idaho Territory. She set it on the table where Jebediah would see it. When he stood to leave, she handed it to him without explanation. "Post it from town," she said. He took it without asking. Some things don't need explaining. They just need doing. When Jebediah finally stood to go, just before the light started its long afternoon, leaned toward the west. He paused at the door. He turned his hat in his hands. "I never did ask your name," he said to the woman. "You're a real one. I figured there was a real one." Cora set down the dish she was drying. She looked at Jebediah. Then, for just a moment, she looked at Tobias at the table. Tobias did not look up from his carving, but something in his hands paused and resumed. She looked back at Jebediah. "Cora Montgomery," she said. It was the first time she had said it. Not Dempsey, which was borrowed, not Sterling, which was a wound, something new, something chosen, the way names ought to be chosen, with full knowledge of what you're choosing and why. Jebediah turned the name over in his mind the way he turned a coin, checking both sides. "Good name," he said, and meant it. On his way back down the trail, with the afternoon light coming long and gold through the pines, he reached into his coat and took out his wager book. He opened it to the last entry, Cora Dempsey. The right column had been blank all winter. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about what number to put there. He looked back up the trail, at the thin line of smoke from 2 chimneys visible above the tree line. Then he closed the book, put it back in his pocket, and did not open it again. Some accounts, he decided, don't need a number. Some of them just need to be left open. That evening, the last of the April light still warm in the windows, Leo asleep in his room, not the rafters, not the corner, his room with a bed and a blanket, and the child's drawing of the possibly horse on the wall. Cora washed the dinner dishes while Tobias Hayes sat by the fire. He was working on the piece of wood he had been carving all week. I hummed the same fragment as before, that low, formless melody that came from the back of the memory, below the level of intention. She had hummed it every few evenings, she realized. It had become part of the rhythm of the place, like the sound of the stove, like the sound of the wind, like the sound of a large man's quiet work by the fire. She heard Tobias set down the carving. She heard him stand. He came and stood in the kitchen doorway. She could feel him there without turning. He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn that?" he said. Cora stopped and thought about it genuinely. "I don't know," she said. "It just comes. When things are," she searched for the word, settled. She heard him take a slow breath. "My sister used to sing it," he said. She turned. He was standing in the doorway with his hands at his sides, looking at some middle distance that wasn't in the room. His face had the quality it had in the yard with Leo, open in a way it was not usually open, like a window that has been painted shut for years, and has finally been given permission. "She used to sing it in the evenings," he said, "when we were children. I couldn't have told you the name of it." He paused. "I couldn't have told you. I still knew it." Cora looked at him. She did not say anything. There are moments that do not need to be spoken into, that need only to be inhabited. The way you inhabit a room that has finally been made habitable. After a long time of not being, she turned back to the dishes. After a moment, Tobias returned to his chair. She finished washing up. The fire went on with its quiet work. Outside, the bitterroot pines stood in the new dark of an April evening and said nothing. The way mountains say nothing, which is to say they said everything, which is to say some things are too large for words, and have always known it. They still called it Misery Peak. Old names are hard to kill in frontier country. Names get into the ground the way roots do, deep and stubborn, outlasting the things that made them. The mountain didn't care what people called it. It had been called worse, probably, by people who hadn't survived it. But the people who had actually been up that mountain, the ones who had sat at that table, eaten that bread, watched that boy run barefoot through the yard, heard the big man's rare laugh come out of him like something loosening, those people had another name for it. They just called it the Montgomery place. They said it the way people say. The name of somewhere they wouldn't mind being, somewhere that, in the general reckoning of the country, had earned itself. Down in the valley, Jebediah Cole retired his wager book. He kept it. He didn't throw it away. He put it in the chest at the foot of his bed, under a wool blanket and a pair of boots he was saving for dress occasions, alongside a few other objects that had accumulated over 62 years of living, things that didn't have a practical use anymore, but that a man keeps because they are evidence of something he went through and came out of, and would like to remember clearly. He never opened it again. He didn't need to. The story was in his head by then, where it would stay until he told it to someone on a cold night, the way stories stay, and the way stories travel, and the story, the real one, the one underneath the rumors, was simple enough. Two broken people and a broken child, a mountain that didn't care whether they made it, three things left in the snow, mourning, that nobody could explain without knowing the beginning. And the beginning was this. A woman had stepped down from a stagecoach in the mud of Orofino, Idaho Territory, in the winter of 1883, carrying a Winchester and a scarred trunk, and a secret that would have gotten most people killed. She She had looked up at the mountain. She had bought a horse, and she had not once, not for a single step of the whole long climb, looked back down at the valley.